It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's Roy Millsy, by the hometown commander. We are recording another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list for you on my quest to outbrew your favorite Magic channel. I got a little bit sidetracked last week, so we're here to finish up last week's Doctor Who content on the Masters of Evil precon, finishing up today in my, I guess what you would call upgrade for the precon. Again, just like the weeks previous, I'm trying my best to keep as many 40k cards in the, Doctor Who cards in the deck as I can, and of course keep it the cost down as much as possible. Trying to just simply upgrade the deck as best we can, get it more synergistic, have more fun with it, and add some cards that can help our strategy both from other sets and from the other Doctor Who decks. So the Master of Evil precon is helmed by Davros, Dalek creator, a 1 blue, black, red, 3/4 alien scientist with menace. At the beginning of our end step, we create a 3/3 black Dalek artifact creature token with menace if an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn. So just 1, no matter how many opponents that lost 3 or more life. But then each opponent who lost 3 or more life this turn faces a villainous choice. We draw a card or they discard a card. So the deck is going to really try to do 2 things. 1, get our opponents to lose at least 3 life every turn so we get the Dalek. The Dalek does come in with menace, which is pretty good. It means you get a great attacker. We also want to do the bottom one, and we want to punish our opponents by, if they give us more cards, playing more things, but if they discard, we can also take advantage of them discarding as well. There's a lot of ways we could take it. I think just like any good precon, we're going to try to keep it pretty rounded, try to take advantage of all of the abilities, and then we can have some fun with that. Getting into the mana base, it's staying pretty darn close to what we got out of the precon and adding some of the extra lands from the other decks. Main thing we added in were the commander lands that come in tapped unless we have 2 or more opponents. This is going to help us out with a teeny bit of consistency as far as that goes. And then we brought in, I can't remember if Path of Ancestry was in the deck, but I brought it in. It's a 3-color land, and at a 3-color deck, that's important. But other than that, just keeping things in, keeping the mana base fairly fair. Most of it's straight out of the precon, but again, just bringing in things like, Frostboil Snarl if it wasn't in there already, some of the red-blue lands in if they weren't in there already, and then those commander lands just to finish it all out. Okay, so every card in the deck, we're taking a look at the lens of what part of our strategy does it help us out with. Blink. Blink's a really fun card because it says for the first 2 chapters, we choose target creature and its owner shuffles it to their opponent's into their library and then investigates. So this is some removal. And then on 3 and 4, we get create a 2/2 black alien angel artifact creature token with first strike, vigilance, and whenever an opponent casts a creature spell, this permanent isn't a creature until end of turn. So this is a complete play on the Weeping Angels from Doctor Who, making these angels, and whenever someone sees them, whenever someone plays a creature, they don't become a creature, but I guess on our turn they will have first strike and vigilance. Again, this is just really good because the top 2 parts of this are going to be removal, and the bottom 2 gives us a little bit to play with on board. Well, one of the ways that we can get an opponent to lose 3 life no matter what is going to be something like Court of Ambition. When it comes in, we become the Monarch, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 3 life, and they discard a card. So everybody's going to lose 3 and discard a card right off the bat, which means if we have Davros in this out, they've automatically sufficiently got to what Davros needed. But it says if it were the Monarch, instead they lose 6 and they discard 2 cards. So if we can have no one attack us and keep that Monarch, we're going to have them lose more. But no matter what, we're always going to have them lose 3 life. And this is going to help turn on our strategy and make sure that we're always getting it in for enough. Day of the Moon says choose a creature name, then go to all creatures with that name for Day of the Moon for as long as it's out. What's interesting about this is it may be odd, choose a creature card name, then go to all creatures with that name. But the cool part of this is, let's say our opponents are always making a bunch of tokens of the same name, or they're making tokens of 2 types. We can make sure we go with them. We can just pick a creature, and because we don't target it, we just goad them, and that's going to help them stop from avoiding us, maybe stop from taking that monarchy away. But again, this is an interesting card. For 3 turns, we're going to goad, and that's going to help us probably try to avoid some attacks if possible. Death in Heaven. Target player mills 2 cards and then exiles their graveyard. This is going to help be an answer to some graveyard decks if we see them running around. And then 3 says, put all creature cards exiled with Death in Heaven onto the battlefield face down under your control. There's 2/2 Cyberman artifact creatures. So this is cool because if we hit the opponent with the right graveyard, maybe they've already had a few creatures die over the course of the game, or they're milling themselves into creatures. They get rid of them, and then we get all of them back as artifact creatures, and we're going to have some cards that are going to care about artifacts that we can take advantage of. Genesis, the Daleks. On the first 3, we're going to make a 3/3 Dalek with Menace for each lore counter on it. So on the first one, we're going to make 1, on the second one, we're going to make 2, and the third one, we're going to make 3. And on the fourth, it says target opponent faces a villainous choice. Destroy all Dalek creatures, and each of your opponents lose life equal to the total power of the Daleks that died this turn, or destroy all non-Dalek creatures. So this is the second ability is kind of bad in the sense that it could wipe out some of our board that aren't Daleks. But again, if we have enough Daleks, if all of them stick around, you're talking about 15, 18 power worth of Daleks that they're each going to take each opponent. Or we just wipe the board, which I think is fair enough, and we get to keep all of our Daleks around. So I think this is well worth the 6 mana, especially if we can play into it a little bit. And not only that, but remember, Davros is making Daleks. We have other Daleks in the deck. We have other things that care about Daleks. So it may be more than just the first 3 portions of this saga that are making Daleks that this opponent has to choose. Pain Magnification. Whenever an opponent is dealt 3 or more damage by a single source, that player discards a card. This is going to be helpful because this is taking all of our effects that are, dealing people damage and making them pitch a card in the process. Waste Not feels right if most of the time people are going to, maybe sometimes people are going to discard off Davros' ability, sometimes people are going to draw, but with these other effects that are making our opponents discard, Waste Not makes a ton of sense. When they discard a creature, we get a zombie token. When they discard a land, we add double black. And when they discard a non-creature, non-land card, we draw a card. So this is helpful because when they do discard, depending on what they discard, hopefully we can benefit. Now, if they discard a land, this is double black mana, at least for Davros' ability, that would be on our end step, and so we'd have to be a little bit, we may not be able to get to use that. But if we have a discard effect that goes off in our main phase, well, then we'll get to use that double black if they discard a land. And then Wound Reflection, which came in the deck, just fell as right at the beginning of each end step. Each opponent loses life equal to the life they lost this turn. And I think this is one of those cards that is going to make us not necessarily care about stopping at 3, which I don't think we want to do anyway. I think if we can deal as much damage to our opponents in a turn, why wouldn't we do it? It just helps reduce the game and gets us closer to the win. But I think Wound Reflection helps just because we're going to kind of deal double. Remember that damage causes loss of life, so even if we deal combat damage to an opponent, it's still going to count. We're now chunking them out for twice the damage per turn. And I think this is just going to come one of those cards that if we can get the 6 mana and get it down with a half-decent board sitting behind it, we're going to end up ending the game even faster. Wanted to get a lot of the mana base, a lot of mana rocks here since, of course, we're in Grixis and our ramp is drawing in mana rocks, Arcane Signet, Commander Sphere, Cursed Mirror, which can come in as a copy of any creature on the battlefield if the turn it comes in and it gains haste, which is nice. This could copy one of our creatures or our opponents, and then every other turn it just turns into a mana rock. Laser Screwdriver, which is our Master's version of the Sonic Screwdriver, which is in all of the Doctor's decks. Taps for a mana of any color, tap 1 and tap it to tap target artifact, tap 2 and tap it to surveil 1. And 3 and tap to go target creature, which I feel like will become important depending on what situations we're in. Lightning Greaves to give something haste and shroud. This feels good for maybe a creature that we want to get in and get attacking right away, since it has that equip 0. So, we can get Lightning Greaves potentially down early and get it onto a creature right as soon as they come down, or just use it to protect something. Lithiform Engine just felt right. We're going to have a lot of these weird triggered abilities that are going to be going off. So I think the two mana version of this ability to just copy it feels like it could be right. I do believe this could copy something like Wound Reflection. I could be wrong, but there's a lot of abilities in the deck that I feel like this is going to end up copying, and I think that's going to become important. The 3 can copy target instant or sorcery, so again, if we have some removal and we want to get for 2 of them, we can do that. Or 4 can copy a target permanent spell we control. The copy becomes a token, so if we get a creature that isn't legendary, we can pay 4 and just copy it and make another one, which is pretty cool. Machine's got Effigy, which works very similar to Cursed Mirror, except it's a little bit different. It says that when it enters the battlefield, is a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it's an artifact and has add blue. So it becomes, but it's not a creature. So it comes in as a copy of a creature, but it stays an artifact. And this is important for certain abilities we'll see when we get up to our creatures. And that just becomes important because then we could potentially get extra copies of something and kind of protect it away as being an artifact instead of a creature, which could get Wrath. We have the Soaring, and then we're playing all 3 of our talismans, stealing that Talisman of Creativity from the timey-wimey deck. Getting into sorceries, our spells, we're playing removal, we're playing fun, and we're just trying our best to get as much of value out of our spells as we can. Chaos Warp feels right as a piece of removal in any deck. We do have access to some great removal in these three colors, especially cheap removal, but Chaos Warp is good because a lot of our cheap removal tends to only hit creatures. We still need to be able to hit any permanent, and Chaos Warp is one of the ways to do that. That player shuffles that permanent into their deck, reveals the top card. If it's a permanent, they get it, which can go down for us. But again, this could just stop a combo. It could stop someone from a big attack. You never quite know when just getting rid of one permanent can then help. Counterspell. It's always good to run at least one. We are running two technically, but one true counterspell. And it's always not bad to play because you never know when, in the right scenario, the best removal may be just countering a spell. Cyber Conversion, turn target creature face down. It's a 2/2 Cyberman artifact creature. This card is bonkers because when you think about it, this is a really good card. Someone's commander just turns face down. It doesn't get to go back to the command zone. Someone's creature that may need to combo off, or you just turn it face down and become it into an artifact creature. This is a really cool card, and it's just going to come probably harder for our opponents to use that thing. They have to sacrifice it, get it back. It just helps slow that opponent down. Dark Ritual would help us get out either Davros a little bit faster or get access to a bigger spell. Dark Ritual, to me, is a black staple when it comes to a lot of decks because it can just help you get more mana quickly. Maestro's Charm just felt right. We can look at the top 5, put one in our hand and the rest to our graveyard. Each opponent loses 3 and we gain 3, which is going to trigger Davros automatically, or it deals 5 damage to target creature Planeswalker. Again, we're using it mainly for the middle one just to get that 3, and that's going to get us automatically a Davros trigger that turn, which is important. And that's a 9 life loss swing across all of our opponents. Reality Shift to exile a creature, and that owner manifests top card library. Again, here's exile removal in blue, but the exile removal is important. We don't get the cheap Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile, right? We need some sort of exile removal. We can't just destroy everything. Sometimes you need to exile something, and I like Reality Shift for that. Reverse Polarity is a card that I'm really interested in because it seems like a fun card that I think can be good in a couple situations. So it's a modal spell. We choose one, counter all other spells. So if there's a big stat going on and we want to kind of put an end to it, we can do that. Swap each creature's power and toughness till end of turn. I doubt this will be used very much in our deck, but I think it's still good nonetheless, because if you have somebody who has a big board of creatures that are very defensive, and that's what they're taking advantage of, we could swap it and make it worse for them. And then creatures can't be blocked this turn, could end up ending a game in all reality. Stopping creatures from blocking, if we have a board, especially like we're going to have, where we're going to have lots of small artifact creatures or creatures with Myriad, I just feel like this is going to end up helping us end the game if that's what we needed to do. Terminate, just to destroy a creature. This is how it ends, is a fun, flavorful card. It says target creature's owner shuffles it into their library, then faces a villainous choice. They lose 5 life, or they shuffle another creature they own into their library. So we get to pick the first one. The second one would be their choice. So there's obviously going to be some scenarios where if a person has a very wide board state, this is how it ends into the creature we really want to get rid of, and then they just pick a token or something to avoid losing the 5 life. Sure, that's fair, but I think it's still worth it. Of course, the best case scenario is you pick someone who has exactly 2 creatures. We get rid of the one we want to get rid of more than the other one, and then they have to face their choice, 5 life, or, of course, the other one going away. And then a licensed disintegration says destroy target creature if we control an artifact, which we're almost always going to. We have so many artifact creatures in the deck. We have so many artifacts that make mana. It deals 3 damage to that creature's controller. So this is another great removal spell in this deck. Yes, it is maybe 1 mana more expensive than Terminate or Doomblade or some of these black removal spells, but being able to deal 3 damage to that creature's controller, again, activates Davros, and it gets us down to that line. Blasphemous Act. There's a lot of great board wipe choices in our colors, and Blasphemous Act just remains to be one of the best ones. 13 damage to everything, can clear the board most of the time, unless your opponent's playing with Indestructible, can clear all those pesky tokens. And of course, if we have anything cares about dealing damage to creatures, you can pay off Blasphemous Act. We don't really have anything in that in this deck, but again, Blasphemous Act it costs 1 less for each creature on the battlefield, and most of the time just going to wipe the board anyway. It's effectively going to be run 1 red mana to wipe the board, and that's not bad at all. Delete says we deal X damage to each non-artifact creature in each player. Now, if Delete didn't say non-artifact, I think this would be a card we wouldn't want to play. But because Davros is making those Daleks that are artifacts, when we get up to creatures, we'll talk about Missy and some of her cards that make these 2/2 Cyberman artifact creature tokens. We're almost always going to have these artifact creature tokens laying around, and most of our creatures are going to be artifacts. And depending on how we do this, we could potentially protect some of our non-artifact creatures by only doing as much damage as we need to, just to wipe the whole board. And we have to remember that it does say each player, so we can't just put 20 into this because we're just going to end up hurting ourselves. But it may end up being worth it, depending on what we can get rid of to save what we have. Doomsday Confluence looks like a ton of fun for those who aren't used to the Confluence spells. Confluence spells are normally known for having being modal spells that you get to choose so many of. What's cool about Doomsday Confluence is we get to choose X, and we can choose the same mode X times. So if we pay 9 into this, 4 into each of the X's, we get to just do 4 of them, and we can do as many times as we want. So as each player sacrifices a non-artifact creature, create a 3/3 Dalek artifact creature token with menace, or each opponent discards card. I see us doing a lot more the last two, but the top one could be important. If someone's playing a Voltron deck or they don't have a ton of non-artifact creatures, we could hurt them that way. One of my favorite cards from this precon, and a card that I've already had fun casting out in some of the games personally, is Ensnared by the Mara. This card is a ton of fun. Each opponent faces a villainous choice. They exile cards from the top of their library until they exile a non-land card, and you may cast that card without paying its mana cost, or that player exiles the top 4 cards of their library, and Ensnared by the Mara deals damage equal to the total mana value of those cards to that player. This is a really tough choice for most people, because you absolutely not know. You're never going to know what you're going to hit off of this. In the game that I used this card in, 1 person chose to let me get that top card, and 2 people chose to just do the top 4 because they weren't worried about the mana value, and it put in some decent work nonetheless. This is a fun card, and this is the kind of thing that I enjoy in Commander, is being able to play some fun splashy spells and have a good time. Exterminate, well, we knew it had to happen. Exterminate, of course, is the Daleks catchphrase. So for 3 mana, we just destroy target creature and its opponent loses 3 life. Again, triggering Davros to do that. But here's the best part. We can tap an untapped Dalek we control, do it again. And cast it and pick new copies. So the more Daleks we have, this 3 mana could turn into a pseudo board wipe by just taking out the things we want and making their controllers lose 3 life. I like it. This is what we want from black removal in this deck, and I like it that it's so flavorful for all these Daleks we're trying to make. Feed the Swarm. I think it's becoming a black staple as far as removal goes. Destroy target creature or enchantment, and we lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. So get rid of a pesky creature. Or enchantments, which are very important in our format, and we just have to pay the life for the difference. But again, it's well worth the 2 mana depending on what you're going to hit. Hunted by the Family is one I'm intrigued to see how it does in a game, and I think it could be a ton of fun. It says choose up to 4 target creatures you don't control. For each of them, that creature's controller faces a villainous choice. That creature becomes a 1/1 human and loses all abilities, or we create a copy of it. So obviously one of those spells we have to be careful. More people could just choose to make all of them 1/1s, and I think that's perfectly fine depending on what those things are. But at the same time, we might end up getting copies of them. So, it's a fun card for 7 mana. It's a card we can take advantage of and see maybe if we can get some value off of. If not, we just turn some pesky things into 1/1s and get rid of their abilities on the board. Renicus's Vow of Duplication. I think a lot of what Blue excels at in Commander is 1, counterplay, 2, drawing, and 3, making copies. And Renicus lets us take a legendary creature and make a non-legendary copy of it with flying. This feels perfect on Davros. This feels perfect on a couple other creatures we have in the deck, but it feels important. Getting multiple Davros triggers a turn could be pretty darn good. We're playing the pair of Ponder and Preordain for some draw. Try to get as much draw as we can in the deck. I feel like the deck could also have more. I feel like you could always have more draw, but these are both good. Ponder lets you look at the top 3 and shuffle if you want, and then draw a card. Preordain is just scry 2 and then draw a card. But again, both are well worth the 1 blue mana. I thought about playing the Brainstorm as well, but again, it's hard when you sit down and you build a version 1.0 of a deck to always have your ratios correct. So maybe after someone takes this deck and plays it, they realize they need a little bit more card draw and bring in, Faithless Looting or Brainstorm or some of our 2 mana suite of draw. But again, I wanted to get some. Yes, Davros might end up drawing us cards off his ability alone, but I think we still need to plan for draw, especially in the early turns if we want to get into our mana rocks and get our lands down. And then their Name is Death just seems like a fun card. This was from the Necrons precon. It just says destroy all non-artifact creatures. So again, if we have a big board state of artifact creatures and our opponents don't, boom, just blow up the board, keep all of our creatures around, and have some fun. All right, well, let's get into the creatures. Most of them are from this deck. We've added a few extra ones just because they fit our strategy really well. We have a Shaw the Lone Cyberman. He is a legendary artifact creature. It says the first non-legendary artifact spell you cast each turn has casualty 2, so we can sack a creature with power 2 or greater. If so, we copy it. And it says whenever you sacrifice another creature, put a +1/+1 counter on him. So not just to his, not just to this ability, but anytime we sacrifice an artifact creature, we put a counter on him. And this is great because we're with abilities like. With some abilities, we may want to sacrifice things for value, and that will allow them to put counters on them, or just for its ability alone, we can put them on there. Auton Soldier. We can have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it isn't legendary, is an artifact in addition to other types, and has Myriad. And this is the interesting part about Auton Soldier, is it comes in, it's not legendary, and it has Myriad. Now, the bad part of Myriad is that we don't get to keep them for the rest of the turn. It's just to the end of combat. This is where, picking Davros, if we kept them to the end of the turn, we would just pick Davros, because then we can get all the extra tokens. But I like Auton Soldier because at minimum, it just becomes another copy of Davros, and we get a second copy of that effect every turn. At maximum, we pick something our opponents really have that we really, really want. And if it has a good ETB ability or another battlefield ability, well, then giving it Myriad's cool, because then once we attack with it, we get 2 extra copies of it on attack, and then we get that ability twice more. So I like Auton Soldier. It's an interesting card. 6 mana seems well worth it, depending on what we do with it. Cult of Skaro, of course, one of the most infamous sects of Daleks in the show. They get their own card, legendary artifact Dalek. It says whenever it attacks, we choose one, put a +1/+1 counter on each artifact creature you control, which is pretty cool. Draw 2 cards, make a Dalek, or each opponent loses 4 life. Again, all 4 of these abilities I feel like really help us out for what we want. The first one is going to buff up all our Daleks and Cybermen. The second one just does they're all we want it to do. The third one makes us another Dalek, and the fourth one just activates Davros. So I like it. Again, this one feels really good. And this isn't another bad one that Auton Soldier could copy if we wanted to, just to get the extra abilities. Cyberman Patrol. If artifact creatures you control have afflict 3, which is, if I recall correctly, anytime that creature is blocked, defending player loses 3 life. So all of our artifact creatures have that. If they block them, they lose 3 life, and that's going to trigger Davros. Cyberman Squadron says non-legendary artifact creatures you control have Myriad. This is just going to give Myriad to all of those tokens, making more tokens when we attack, and then going to make it harder for our opponents to deal with them in combat. Dalek Drone, Flying, and Menace, and whenever it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls. That player loses 3 life. A good creature, and if we can give this Myriad somehow, or if we can give this a copy of this somehow or what have you, this is just going to get better and better. But again, comes in, destroys a creature, deals, that player loses 3 life, going to trigger Davros for that player. Dalek Squadron, just Myriad and Menace. So again, could hit everybody, hopefully, and would be a way to get that Davros trigger every turn. I wanted to try Croaks out. When it comes in, we sacrifice it unless it was escaped out of our graveyard. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, each opponent discards a card, and then each opponent who didn't discard a non-land card this way loses 3 life. So we put Croaks down the first time, the ability goes off, he sacrifices itself back to the graveyard. We get that ability, potentially losing 3 life and potentially triggering Davros. And then for 4 mana and exiling 5 other cards from our graveyard, we can bring Croaks back, and then every time it attacks, we're getting that ability again and again and again. Piling up damage, piling up discard. Hand control can be important. It's tough in a format like Commander, just due to how much people are drawing. But I still think it's important. I don't think it's something we can discount in the game that we play. Loyal Subordinate says at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, each opponent loses 3 life. Well, bang, there we go. Davros trigger every turn. And again, these effects are important for what we're trying to do because Davros offers us a lot of value. Marionette Master just kind of seemed like a card that was a slam dunk. So when it comes in, we put 3 counters on it or make 3 artifact creature tokens. I think we're always going to put the counters on it because we're going to have plenty of artifact creature tokens. And it says whenever an artifact we control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. So if we put the counters on it, it's going to always be 4. If one of our Daleks dies in combat, or what have you, or any of our artifacts tokens die and go to the graveyard, any of our artifacts that we have that we sacrifice go to the graveyard, we're going to be having people lose 4 life, and again, that will trigger Davros and just help us end the game quicker. A card that I immediately wanted to try to put in here was Mishra. Mishra's cards care so much about artifacts. And the card next we'll see cares about probably for this deck a little bit more, but this one just felt right for how much we're going to have tokens laying around that are going to be attacking, especially if we can help them out in any way. Mishra says that whenever you attack, Mishra doesn't even have to attack. You just need to attack in general. Each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of attacking creatures. So yes, this will go off before Myriad and all these other abilities if we have them on our creatures. But hey, we attack with 3 creatures. Everybody loses 3 before we even get damaged. And so we already know Davros is going to go off. But again, if we attack with 10 creatures, 11 creatures, again, everyone's losing that before we even go to blocks, before we even go to damage. And this is the kind of ability that's going to get really important when we start going wide, because we need a way to end the game with our wide board. And yes, we will eventually do that by combat, but I think these attack triggers are going to certainly help. Mr. Eminent One, the commander of our Brothers War Precon, says at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of a target non-creature artifact you control, except its name is Mishra's War from. It's a 4/4 construct. It gains haste, and we sack the thing in the next end step. What I like about this guy is twofold. One, we get a copy of any non-creature artifact we control, which could be a mana rock, it could be a bunch of other things. And it becomes a 4/4 and we can attack with it. Or we can just use it right away because it has haste. So if we make a copy of a mana rock, we make a copy of a mana rock. Otherwise, we just turn one of our mana rocks, copies into a creature and hit somebody with it. Missy, the alternate commander for the deck, and the one I had really considered, but the problem is I couldn't find a scenario where I could really game her second ability. So her first ability says, whenever another non-artifact creature dies, return it to the battlefield under your control as a 2/2 Cyberman artifact creature, tapped. This is a really good ability, and I think why Missy might be worth it as a commander, because you can start taking people's creatures and make them into Cyberman. The problem is I feel like Missy's only ever going to do that, because as I read this second ability, I think it's more often than not going to always lead to one scenario. It says at the beginning of your end step, each opponent faces a villainous choice. Each artifact creature you control deals 1 damage to that opponent, or you draw a card and chaos ensues. So basically what that's saying is every opponent either chooses 1 damage for each artifact creature we control, or we draw a card and chaos ensues, which is only happens if we're playing with Plane Chase. This choice is almost always going to be us drawing a card. Unless we have no artifact creatures, then I can see it being the first one. But more often than not, this is just going to have drawing us cards. And I wish we could game it a little bit more. I wish there was some way I could find to really force our opponents to make the first choice, but it's more often than not just going to lead us to card draw. If I was building into Missy, I'd probably lead into more whenever we draw a card, our opponents take damage or mill one or do something. But Missy, I think, is in here just to get us those Cyberman tokens. Sad Robot is here, and he fits perfect for the deck. Gets a basic land on his way in, draws us a card when he dies. Again, it's an artifact, and I think it does everything we want to do to help us ramp up. Stormkiln Artist just kind of feels right. It gets +1/+0 for each artifact we control. We're probably going to have a ton of them laying around. But whenever we cast it or copy an instant or sorcery, we get a treasure. Again, I just feel like Stormkiln Artist is going to be huge. It could get in for good damage. It could do things as necessary. But I think it's just here to help us get a little bit of token generation with the treasures. Sycorax Commander, first strike and haste. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, each opponent faces a villainous choice. That opponent discards all the cards in their hand, then draws that many -1, or it deals damage equal to that player to the number of cards in their hand. So obviously, if an opponent has a big hand, if they don't want to take the 7 or 6, they're going to pick the first ability. If an opponent has a small hand, they're going to take the blast one. But again, I don't think we really care. It's a good ability. It could play into some of those more waste not type effects if we wanted to put more of them in there. But again, we're just hurting our opponents by making them choose to either get rid of some cards or take some damage. Tectonic Giant says when it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, we choose one. It deals 3 damage to each opponent, or we exile the top 2, choose one until the end of your next turn. We can play that card. Of course, in here, because its first ability literally will always trigger Davros, which is important. And that 3 damage a turn every time it attacks is going to force our opponent to deal with Tectonic Giant, because that 3 damage is just going to add up over the course of a turn. The Cyber Controller, our legendary Cyberman, when it enters the battlefield, each opponent mills X cards. Put all creature cards milled this way onto the battlefield face down under your control. There are 2/2 Cybermans, and other artifacts get +1/+1. So the more mana we have, the more we dump into this, mill a bunch of cards, get a bunch of 2/2s hopefully, and build our army. I like this. This is a fun card, and it just fits into what we're trying to do. One of our other legendary Daleks, the Dalek Emperor, a 7-mana 6/6 Dalek that has affinity for Daleks, and we're going to hopefully have a bunch of them, so that's going to be good. Other Daleks have haste, so this is going to give us the ability to, if we have any other Daleks come in by any other abilities, come in with haste. It says at the beginning of combat, each opponent faces a villainous choice. They sacrifice a creature, or we make a Dalek. So this is important, right? We could make 3 Daleks each turn, and again, they're going to come in with haste, or our opponents are sacrificing creatures. Again, just forcing our opponents to make bad decisions, getting more Daleks on the board with Menace that are going to potentially help us get 3 damage through, get those abilities off our commanders. Trigger, again, all of this is working towards that every turn if possible. The Master Multiplied, although it has its own deck, and we talked about that last week, I still think this card's really good. The legendary rule doesn't apply to creature tokens we control. Triggered abilities you control can't cause you to sacrifice creature tokens or exile creature tokens you control. This will allow our Myriad to never let us exile the Myriad creatures that get created. So what I like about this is if we have the Master Multiplied and Auton Soldier at the same time, we could put the Auton Soldier on Davros, put the Master Multiplied on, on out, and then if the Auton Soldier attacks as that copy of Davros or the Master Multiplied itself with Myriad, they're all just going to stick around with Myriad. And so Master Multiplied is just going to continue, again, by itself, it's just going to continue to multiply and multiply itself and become more and more and more, just like in the episode, and become harder and harder to deal with. The Valyard says that if an opponent faces a villainous choice, they face it again. This is really good for all of our abilities because we want them to go off as many times, so we get to just do it a second time. And it says if we vote an additional time, which isn't going to happen as much. We're not playing into as much of the voting for us. Vashta has Indestructible and Shadow, so it can't be blocked except by creatures with Shadow. It can't block or be blocked except by creatures with Shadow. And it says at the beginning of each end step, if a creature died this turn, put a counter on it. It could get big and hard to deal with. And the Vashta Nevada are a fun enemy in the library that the Doctor has to face. And again, it's just a cool way to say it always kind of grows by taking over more and swarming. Well, Weeping Angel, one of the most iconic villains of modern Who, is here. First strike vigilance, whenever opponent casts a creature spell, it isn't a creature till end of turn, so it kind of freezes because someone looks at it. And then if it would deal combat damage to a creature, prevent that damage, and that owner shuffles it into their library. So if we attack with it, or we flash to block it in, it has first strike, so it's going to hopefully hit something before they can hit it and put it back in their library, and that kind of simulates that Weeping Angel's ability to kind of push someone back into time. And then Zygon Infiltrator, I wanted to make sure we kept some of these iconic villains in here, and the Zygon, at least in the more recent era, is definitely one. 2 and a blue to tap another target creature and put a stun counter on it, and Zygon Infiltrator becomes a copy of that for as long as it remains tapped, activate only as a sorcery. So every turn, we could do this every turn, but remember the stun counter makes it not untap the next time it untaps. So we don't have to do this every turn. We could do this every 2 turns and remain Zygon Infiltrator as a copy of a creature if we wanted to. Again, it's just a fun card. It's a creature, and we can play around with some of our opponent's things. Take their things if we want, keep them locked down. I just think it's an interesting card and adds a little bit of control to our deck. But what do you think of the Masters of Evil upgrade? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear your guys' opinion, and I will catch you guys next time.